Welcome to Friday's edition of COVID-19. Authorities here have recorded over 500 new infections today, ahead of talks between President Moon Jae-in and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden over in the U.S. Among the issues on their agenda is vaccine partnership, and we have more on this later on in the program. We start now with the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So let's begin here in Korea with the drop in daily tally.
Sure, Sunny. 85 fewer cases, which means we are down to the 500s. 561 infections to be exact as of 12 a.m. and that includes 542 domestic cases and 19 cases from abroad. Now, with figures hovering between the 500s and the 700s, the average in daily infections in the past week stands between the high 500s and the low 600s. And we are seeing a decline in the capital Seoul here to 172 cases, not much different in Gyeonggi-do province at 164. Also, we've got a mix of single digits and double digits in other parts of the country. And the total number of cases around in the country stands at 134,678, and 6 more people have lost their lives due to COVID-19 in the past day. Now, on the vaccine front, Moderna has been approved by Korea's drug ministry this Friday, now becoming the 4th vaccine to get the green light for use here in the nation, following AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Janssen. And beginning Saturday, vaccinations for seniors aged 75 and above who have yet to receive their first Pfizer shot will resume after a temporary halt, as people who had to get their second shot first had to be prioritized. And we are seeing a rise in people who are getting their second shot, with over 207,000 people having been inoculated for the second dose on Thursday.
Right, so and moving on, I understand current COVID-19 measures will be maintained for 3 more weeks.
Right, Sunny. Social distancing measures have been extended until June 13th, which means level 2 in the capital region and level 1.5 elsewhere. And also the ban on private gatherings of 5 or more people remains, while regardless of the 3-week period, measures can be strengthened at any time. Here's more.
If the situation worsens and daily cases exceed 800, the government will thoroughly review stronger containment measures, such as raising the social distancing level or restricting business operating hours.
Also, depending on the COVID-19 situation by region, individual municipalities can decide on stronger or eased restrictions. The southeastern city of Busan is expected to downgrade their social distancing level to 1.5 and let nightlife entertainment businesses operate until 10 p.m. Whereas due to recent outbreaks at pubs and singing rooms nearby in Daegu, an administrative order has been issued calling on such venues to close for a week beginning Saturday. And now let's move on to international news. The UK has recorded its daily high in a month with almost 2,900 infections on Thursday, and that on the back of a rise in cases of the Indian variant, while Brazil has confirmed its first 6 cases of the Indian strain. Now let's move over to the figures here. India now has over 26 million infections, followed by 15.8 million in Brazil. And the total number of cases around the world stands at 165.8 million. Those are the updates I have for now, but I'll see you back after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Back on the domestic front, efforts to add greater momentum to the local inoculation drive are taking place at all levels. And for more on them, I have our Kim Sung-yeon here in the studio with me. Welcome, Sung-yeon.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, then let's start with the upcoming trials on mixing and matching COVID-19 vaccines.
Right, this was a topic that was talked about in Thursday's afternoon briefing. The government did say that it will conduct trials on mixing COVID-19 vaccines from different manufacturers following a similar study abroad that showed promising results as well. Now, results from the study, which will be conducted by the National Institute of Health, are likely to determine whether the government will allow the mixing and matching of vaccines, which has been adopted by some European countries. Lee Yu-kyung, a senior health official from the country's vaccination task force, said the dose mixing trials will begin at a very near date.
We are planning to conduct clinical trials on mixing vaccines, for example, administering Pfizer or other vaccines as second doses for people who received AstraZeneca vaccine as their first shots. We will use this study as our research foundation in finding ways to make vaccines safer and more effective.
The official said that about 400 to 500 people in different age groups and genders who were given AstraZeneca vaccines for their first dose will be recruited for these trials. As mentioned earlier, people in some countries have received a combination of different vaccines following reports of rare blood clots in AstraZeneca vaccine recipients. For example, France recommends that people aged 55 or younger who got the first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine receive Pfizer or Moderna for their second shot. The KDCA also noted in Thursday's briefing that trial results on mix and match vaccine regimens in countries like the UK, Italy, Russia, and China are slated to be announced soon.
I see. Meanwhile, Song-yeon, Korea's top health official is headed for the U.S., I hear.
Right. So Health Minister Kwon Duk-chul was seen at the airport earlier this morning. He was talking to reporters before leaving to the United States. And in the United States, he is expected to discuss ways to secure additional vaccines for Korea, according to the Health Ministry on Thursday. Now, Son Young-rae, a spokesperson at the Ministry of Health and Welfare, said Thursday that Minister Kwon will be meeting with U.S. government officials and business representatives to discuss vaccine-related matters when he arrives on Friday. Son, however, did not reveal who exactly Kwon will meet, nor any details on the topics for discussion. Kwon's trip was announced shortly after President Moon Jae-in's arrival in Washington for his summit with U.S. President Joe Biden, and the two leaders are scheduled to meet at the White House on Friday local time, with vaccine cooperation being one of the key agendas of their summit.
Right, and we'll have more on that later on the program. Now, before flying out, the health minister, I hear, renewed calls for elderly vaccinations. Song-yeon.
Right, so Minister Kwon emphasized this on Thursday. He urged the nation's senior citizens to sign up for their vaccine appointments, expressing concerns that fewer people have been registering as of late. Now, vaccine registration is currently open for people aged 60 to 74, and more than half of these eligible have made their vaccine appointments. But the pace is slowing down noticeably, and the health minister warned that low vaccine acceptance rates could threaten to have serious implications on the country's inoculation campaign.
We're observing a slowdown in the pace of vaccine registrations, which is worrying since a low rate of vaccine uptake could lead to delays in the return to our normal lives.
Health authorities stressed at Thursday's briefing that people can receive their shots at any date, time, and location of their convenience as long as they make their bookings in time, adding that vaccines are the only path back to our normal lives.
A return to our normal lives where we're safe and healthy can only be made possible through vaccinations. Please help our elderly family and neighbors to book their vaccine appointments before June 3rd.
Now, vaccine registration will remain open until June 3rd, as mentioned, and authorities are calling on everyone eligible to sign up, citing what they say are the real-world effects of vaccinations. They said that in countries with high vaccination rates, like Israel and the U.S., COVID-19 transmission rates are falling, whereas countries that have been slow to roll out vaccines, like Japan, are seeing higher caseloads. The government is also reviewing ways to incentivize vaccinations, for instance, allowing visits to nursing centers so that those who have gotten vaccinated can meet their loved ones face to face.
All right, Song-yeon, as always, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Right, it's time now for the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea for this Friday.
First of all, we have Mr. Kim Gi-nam, who will be briefing us on the COVID-19 response measures here in Korea. I am from the team for the vaccination of COVID-19, and here let us now begin our regular briefing for May 21st, Friday. First of all, on the vaccine front, we have had about 218,000 more people who have received their vaccinations as of yesterday. yesterday. And we have also a total of 3,772,000 more people who have been administered with their first dose, while 1,482,000 have received their second dose. And currently, we are receiving the booking for the COVID-19 vaccine appointments. And as of today, we have about 5.53 million who have already finished up this process. And they have been also doing so to get the registration, get the vaccinations at their desirable locations. And also the booking for these senior citizens is to be carried out through June 3rd. And you could do so through smartphones and also our website. And you could go to our KDCA homepage where you could also do 24/7. And also you could utilize the call centers of KDCA as well as local governments. And regardless of where you live, you can also use the hospitals that are nearby to get these bookings. And as for the people aged between 60 and 74, as well as chronic patients with chronic respiratory diseases, and the people who are and the teachers of the preschools and kindergarten are also under the eligible group right now. And we are also expecting to roll out the vaccines by June 3rd. So we are asking these people to finish these booking by June 3rd. And if you do not book your until June 3rd, please note that you will have your chance to make the booking after all of our general public have finished up with the vaccination process. So this will be a very much later date in the latter half of this year. And this is why we ask you to make reservations as soon as possible. And as for the seniors above the age of 74, we are also administering the drug to the vaccines to these high group of people. And we also have about more than 1.6 million who have registered, who have been administered, that is, with their second dose, and about 1.5 million who have received their first dose. And starting from tomorrow, we will also roll out the first dose starting from tomorrow at designated vaccination centers. And as for the people who have not been receiving the COVID-19 vaccines, as for these senior group citizens, starting from tomorrow, we will be rolling out these vaccines. And this is the goal that we have right now. And as recent cases, we have seen that a family have been infected with COVID-19. However, one senior citizen who had had the vaccine were not infected. And this shows that it is very important to get yourself vaccinated. And this is why we are also providing you guidelines if you are one of these eligible recipients. And please also take part in our inoculation rollout plans. And Pfizer, we have also in plan 438,000 more doses of Pfizer vaccines to arrive on Sunday. And out of the 7 million which are set to arrive in the first half of this year, we will have about 3.5 million already being arrived, and also another 3.5 million will arrive in the near future as well. And earlier this morning, we also had about 297,000 more Pfizer doses that have arrived, and they are now being distributed to vaccination centers nationwide to be rolled out to the senior citizens. And as of the COVID-19 treatment, the remdesivir treatment, we have been administering the drug to a total of 7,030 patients nationwide at over 125 hospitals. And the Regeneron treatment, we have been administering the drug to over 3,300 people here in Korea. And also as for the blood plasma treatment, we have had 47 cases that have been approved by the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. And as for the senior citizens above the age of 60, they are facing more risks of the COVID-19 infections, and they also have higher rates of developing having severe symptoms. And this is why we are receiving the booking for these senior citizens. And if you have not done so yet, we ask you to make these reservations and bookings as soon as possible for your own safety and for the safety of your loved ones. And please get your vaccination at nearby hospitals or designated centers.
출입 기자단으로부터 받은 사전 질문 또 외신 기자단으로부터 받은
Right, there was Kim Gi-man with Friday's afternoon briefing. So what did he have to say?
The official called on the nation's people once again to cooperate in the vaccination front, especially when it comes to senior citizens, stressing that there's been recent cases that really showed how effective the vaccination is when it comes to elderly people. As in one case, during a family gathering, all people except for one person that was age 75 or above who had been vaccinated before were infected. So that really showed how these vulnerable people need this vaccination at this point. And on the vaccination supply, he mentioned that some hundreds of thousands Pfizer doses have arrived earlier in the day, and also on the weekend we will have more doses arriving.
I see. All right, so thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
이번 방미를 백신 협력을 강화하고 백신 생산의 글로벌 허브로 나아가는 계기로 삼겠습니다.
We'll share these vaccines in the service of ending the pandemic everywhere. And we will not use our vaccines to secure favors from other countries.
President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Joe Biden are poised to hold their first summit in Washington, D.C. Friday local time. Among the issues on their agenda is collaboration on the vaccine front. For more on this, I have Dr. Ko Myung-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's been a while, Dr. Ko.
My pleasure.
And I also have Professor Im In-jung from Koongju National University. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Im.
Sure, thank you.
And joining this session virtually is Dr. Bruce Burnett at the RAND Corporation. Welcome, Dr. Burnett.
Thank you.
Right then, Professor Im, nuclear concerns on the Korean Peninsula normally top the agenda of summit talks between Seoul and Washington. But this time around, COVID-19 vaccines also appear to be a key agenda. What are your thoughts?
Totally right. Especially domestic media pay a lot of attention to this vaccine-related partnership between the United States and Korea. I want to interpret this kind of, again, trend or phenomena as another good sign. Again, that this military alliance, again, the ROK-U.S. alliance that used to be fighting for somebody else, but now is trying to move forward. It has been evolving continuously, and now is trying to really contribute to more like a global agenda, such as again the public health concerns, or ecological security issue, or many other climate change, absolutely, or even like a fourth industrial revolution related technological issues and so on. So I do want to see this summit as a very interesting and constructive one, and I'm looking forward to the result.
Right. And keeping what Professor Im has said in mind, Dr. Burnett, what would be the significance of sealing a vaccine deal for Korea and also for the U.S. at this particular summit?
Well, we have to remember that President Biden, a week before the election in November, wrote an op-ed in the Korean media, in Yonhap News, saying that he was going to strengthen the alliance and make it a much stronger arrangement. It was the only foreign newspaper, I'm told, that he did that. He feels that the alliance with South Korea is very important, and helping South Korea get through this pandemic. How can you have peace in the middle of a pandemic? You've got to get the vaccine to get this under control so that we all really do have peace. It's just essential.
Right. Dr. Go, as mentioned earlier, Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions will also be addressed during Friday's talks, which will provide the Biden administration with perhaps a fresh platform to make public its stance on the matter. Now, what are your prospects on Washington's strategy regarding Pyongyang?
So I think we are going to see some more details about the policy review process that the Biden administration was engaged in since earlier this year. So there have been some details of the policy here and there, but we haven't seen the full picture yet. And I think this is a time for Biden administration, it's actually a great time for Biden administration to take advantage of this meeting with the President Moon Jae-in and to show that they have been focusing on this issue for a while and then they're very intent on solving this problem. And also by doing this in front of a South Korean president, the U.S. administration can project the perception that South Korea and the United States are on the same page when it comes to North Korea and in solving they have a common approach towards solving the North Korean issue. And I think that can act as a leverage on Pyongyang. It can show to Kim Jong-un that South Korea and the United States have no disagreement about the future of the negotiations with Pyongyang. So I think it's going to be a very interesting opportunity to see what kind of details will emerge from this meeting.
Right. And Dr. Burnett, according to U.S. media, the Biden administration is ready to share its vaccines with North Korea in hopes of engaging the reclusive regime in dialogue. Do you foresee such discussions taking place during Friday's summit talks between South Korea and the U.S.?
Oh, yes, I think that kind of thing will be discussed. The challenge you face is that South Korea and North Korea must convince the American people that North Korea is being reasonable and an agreeable partner. They haven't recently. They've been unwilling to negotiate. As I understand it, they've been telling their people that what's this about vaccines? There are no vaccines. They're trying to hide the fact that there is a vaccine. So we need to have North Korea act more reliably. And I think that'll be essential if you want Congress and the American people to support that. But it's clear that President Biden is anxious to proceed in that direction.
Right. And keeping what Dr. Burnett has said in mind, Dr. Go, what is known thus far about Pyongyang's vaccine procurements and what would be the implications of international vaccine support to North Korea on talks to rid the Korean Peninsula of nuclear concerns?
So I think there are two dimensions to that right now. I mean, clearly, also there's uncertainty about the vaccine situation in North Korea because I think the COVAX facility is ready to supply North Korea with up to 1.7 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine as soon as North Korea is ready. But then it's not so clear what North Korea's response has been so far. North Korea apparently, there are some schools of thought that believe that North Korea is turning down the request, the offer of supplying vaccines to North Korea. But there's another school of thought that believes that North Korea is not ready yet to receive the vaccines, which requires a high level of logistical requirements. For instance, for vaccines to be effective, there should be a very effective cold chain facility to ensure the vaccines are kept in ideal temperatures. So there are all this uncertainty about North Korea. And then so I think North Korea is clearly, clearly North Korea is divided on this a little bit in the sense that North Korea doesn't want to offer no opportunity for Washington and South Korea to essentially take advantage of this, the need by North Korea for vaccines and essentially bring North Korea away from the provocation cycle that apparently North Korea is engaged in earlier, actually last month when North Korea launched short-range ballistic missiles. So I think North Korea wants to show that it's actually still upset about the lack of progress in the dialogue front. But at the same time, we know that North Korea is under the acute needs for vaccines. So that I think that's the uncertainty right now. And then we have to prod North Korea a little bit more, elicit some sort of reaction, and then prepare our action based on that.
Right. Would it help if North Korea acknowledged the presence of COVID-19 within its territory? Because it is yet to do so.
Well, so, North Korea claims that there hasn't been a single case of COVID-19 in its territory, but then a lot of people believe that's not likely. But here we're not talking about treatment, we're talking about vaccines. So if North Korea wants to reopen its borders and engage the international community and normally and in terms of people-to-people exchanges, but also for trade, which North Korea needs desperately, I think North Korea should be ready with, and I guess it has to get vaccinated for that. So I think that there's clearly a real need for a vaccine in North Korea, regardless of the lack of reaction from Pyongyang.
Right, a very valid point, of course. Professor Im, with regard to vaccine partnership between Seoul and Washington, there is first the option of Seoul borrowing vaccines from Washington and then returning the same amount at a later date. And the second option is Korea seeking to become perhaps an Asian manufacturing base for COVID-19 vaccines. Which option, in your opinion, is better?
I don't think these two options will be conflicting against one another, each other. Because, in theory, the vaccine swap means, again, as you just explained, when we need to have more, we can borrow from the partner country. And the other way around too should be possible, which means we also need to have some capacity to produce enough again the vaccines sooner or later. So that is why I don't think these two ideas are conflicting, or even like I do think these are more like a complementary. So in the longer term, I truly hope South Korea also can be able to contribute to the vaccine production together with how would you say again the resilient supply chain is really necessary, not only for just South Korea, not only for the United States, for the whole world, and especially for the countries who are really suffering from the situation. So if you think about the Korean companies these days, again, especially bio companies, their presence in the world market is getting very rapidly bigger and bigger. So I do think Korean companies can do something, some contribution, absolutely. But my concern is, of course, the copyright, patent, all this intellectual property issue. But as long as the two countries can share the idea and have a will to make the conversation constructive, I think there can be a possibility.
Right. Professor Im, another important agenda perhaps for the Biden administration during Friday's summit is boosting cooperation with Seoul in high-tech industry, the technologies that is, such as microchips and so forth. Do you agree?
Absolutely. COVID-19, I'm very sorry to say like this way, but the pandemic situation really contributed to the innovation and transformation. Especially technological transformation, whether or not you're liking, our way to meet, to chat, has totally changed. From the before the corona situation, it accelerated the fourth industrial revolution. So definitely the demand for the semiconductor, those chips or those things are almost like exploding now. And more like a delicate, sophisticated, complex technology is definitely necessary. As we all know, South Korea is one of the largest provider in the world market. Samsung, SK-Hynix. Of course, U.S. used to be, one of absolutely the greatest supplier, but its presence has been declining. So I do see again complementarity between the U.S. and South Korea in terms of this kind of, again, technology as well.
Right. Staying with the priorities for the Biden administration, Dr. Bennett, there is talk that Washington will seek Seoul's support on maintaining broader regional stability, notably in response to the challenges posed by Beijing. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that Washington will clearly want to have some support from South Korea, but Washington also understands clearly that South Korea is extraordinarily dependent upon trade from China. So getting South Korea to join the Quad or some kind of arrangement like that, which China would strongly oppose and probably impose serious penalties on South Korea, I doubt the Americans are going to demand that. Having China or having South Korea, though, participate as an observer in those activities, that could be very valuable. And so I think there's a balance there. I think there's also an interest on the U.S. Look, we've had a large number of soldiers in the southern part of Korea manning the THAAD air defense missile defense battery who have been living miserable lives because the South Korean government has been unwilling to open the roads to provide them supplies, to provide them housing. And I think the U.S. government is going to expect that if we make South Korean lives better, somehow South Korea ought to be making the lives of those American soldiers better.
Right. And keeping that in mind, Dr. Go, metaphorically speaking then, what cards are likely to be laid on the table by Seoul to advance North Korea-related matters with Washington? And what is your outlook on perhaps the latter's response to these cards?
So I think President Moon is looking for a confirmation or affirmation of from the part of Biden administration for the continuation of the principles that that was reaffirmed back in the Singapore summit in 2018 between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Basically the principle outlines the future direction, future roadmap for the negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang will be based on a peaceful and essentially mutual respect manner. So I think that's a very broad principle, something that Biden administration could easily agree to. But on the other hand, President Moon, by having President Biden affirming and essentially sticking to that principle, can take this to Pyongyang and say that the Biden administration is actually is willing to negotiate, continue the negotiation with Pyongyang on good faith. So that will be one of the first request that's probably going to put on the table tomorrow between President Moon and meeting between President Moon and President Biden. And second, in terms of more details, I think President Moon would like the Biden administration to show that it's actually assigning high priority to the North Korean issue. Even though when it comes to news space, we have been hearing a lot about continuation, the outcome of the policy review process, but then we haven't seen much details out of it. But then besides that, we haven't seen much in terms of actions from the Biden administration to address the North Korean issue. And so, for instance, we know that the United States government has assigned high-level envoys for the Iranian deal to restore the Iranian deal, whereas we are yet to see the replacement for Steve Biegun, who was a special envoy to the North Korea. So I think South Korea would very much like to see an appointment in that regard, or at least a commitment to appointing somebody important soon to that post. And I think these are going to be essentially visible ways for both Washington and Seoul to show that North Korea remains an important issue for both countries. So I think that's going to be a primary motivation for President Moon in terms of North Korea policy.
Dr. Go, there had been talk about possible provocations by Pyongyang ahead of Friday's summit talks between Presidents Moon and Biden. How do you respond?
So the summit meeting between the South Korean president and the U.S. president has always been a prime opportunity, a window opportunity for North Korea to send a message to both countries at the same time. So that this time wouldn't have been any different for North Korea. But then I think we have seen a different pattern from North Korea since last year. North Korea has been holding back a little bit in terms of provocations. We are seeing, in a way, a continuation of the freeze, so to speak, or moratorium on North Korean behavior that started taking shape after the Hanoi summit in 2019. So North Korea, I don't think North Korea wants to walk away from that until Biden administration shows very clearly, in a very explicit manner, that it doesn't want to negotiate with Pyongyang. And maybe North Korea is looking for that too, because North Korea has been engaged in provocation cycle, has been sending very aggressive statements of warning to Washington for, accusing him for staying hostile. So maybe North Korea is looking for an excuse to restart the cycle again. But I think North Korea, in order to do that, North Korea needs to find a strong justification to take such action, and the Biden administration hasn't provided that yet. So I think if North Korea is timing their provocation for this summit, probably they're waiting for the outcome of the summit and the issuing of the joint statement between the two leaders of South Korea and the United States, and maybe they're looking for an excuse to carry out the provocation based on the statement. So if there's a provocation, it's likely to take place after the summit rather than before.
Right. Right. And Dr. Burnett, staying with that, how would the Biden administration, in your view, respond to potential provocations by North Korea?
Well, we have to remember that North Korea continually complains about American hostility. What is more hostile than provocations? Certainly, North Korea is carrying out a level of hostility which is far greater, coupled with its production of nuclear weapons, its possession of nuclear weapons. Remember that in the Panmunjom Agreement in April 2018, Kim Jong-un and President Moon agreed to fully implement all previous North and South Korea agreements and declarations. One of those was the 1992 Denuclearization Declaration, which said that North and South Korea would have no nuclear weapons and no nuclear weapon production capabilities. For North Korea to be violating that massively by continued buildup and possession of weapons, that's hostile. And so the difficulty we face now is Americans look at that situation and say, how sincere is North Korea? They won't meet with us. They're being extraordinarily hostile in their behavior. We need to have a sign that Kim Jong-un really is prepared to be cooperative and peaceful, because he's not being peaceful now.
Right, and keeping in mind what Dr. Burnett has just said, Professor Im, I understand this is also an impromptu question, but how should Seoul seek to balance potential tensions then between Washington and Pyongyang?
Well, as I agree with Dr. Bennett's that view, as North Korea's that kind of approach, they always complained about our hostility. But actually, those kind of actions. If you remember, the Kaesong's, that liaison building was exploded by North. So those kind of things, increasingly made our people first, again, the South Korean people, tired, right? And as long as our people get tired with this kind of situation, it's really difficult for leadership to break through all this, those hurdles or like limitation challenges. I truly hope, that they can be more reasonable and more like cautious about this kind of, again, domestic atmosphere, and together with, again, the bigger picture. Now, I truly hope they can see really bigger picture. These days, again, as I just mentioned earlier, fourth industrial revolution related competition and the climate change, many other very, the transformative changes are ongoing. So having had these kind of, again, the situation, again, if they make another unreasonable, but unreasonable provocation from our point of view. If so, it's going to just make situations worse than before. So, well, that's my statement and a suggestion for them. Mm-hmm.
Right. Dr. Ko, ahead of the upcoming Friday summit with President Biden, President Moon met with congressional leaders and highlighted the importance of international collaboration against the pandemic on the global front and for peace on the regional front that would be here on the Korean Peninsula. What are your thoughts of this?
So I think that's a continuation of President Moon's stance when it comes to alliance, as well as the overall South Korea's diplomatic role in the world. There's been a noticeable change on Korean government's diplomacy after President Moon became the leader of the country. He tends to emphasize a lot the multilateral approach. That's actually music to the ears of American leaders in many ways, because the multilateral approach, from the American point of view, is an emphasis on the liberal values. Liberal democratic values, and this actually tied to the idea of the Quad, and as well as the overall the alignment of the mostly Western liberal democracies against the emerging authoritarian bloc, namely China and Russia. So, but then President Moon has been very careful in not to characterizing this multilateral approach in any direction. Even though he emphasizes a multilateral approach, he doesn't really attribute to it essentially a very strong liberal democratic values. So in that sense, I think a continuation of the South Korean policy of sitting on the fence, so to speak. I think the biggest challenge to South Korean diplomacy from my subjective point of view, is the growing emergence of blocks, political and economic blocks in the world rather than North Korea. And we are seeing the manifestation of that risk in our economic policies. The decoupling is a manifestation of such a pressure. And then Professor Lim mentioned about the exigencies of the post-industrial revolution and the need for the United States to cooperate with South Korea. But the flip side of that is that South Korea is under heavy pressure for decoupling from the supply chains that we have with China. So I think President Moon essentially sent a very very strong message to the Washington establishment, disguised as an emphasis on multilateral approach. But I think he's sending a message to the American leaders that the multilateral approach means not just an alignment and then of values and then principles, but also minimization of friction. So I think, whether President Moon is going to spell that out during the meeting with President Biden, it remains to be seen.
Right, and speaking about sending messages, Dr. Burnett, a bill was proposed on Thursday, I believe, by a U.S. lawmaker calling for a declaration of a formal end to the Korean War. What are your prospects, Dr. Burnett, of its passage?
Well, I think we have to ask, what is the Korean War? Because it's not just the war from 1950 to 53. North Korea has been carrying out a Cold War against the United States and South Korea ever since 1953. So if we're going to see an end of war, it's got to end the Cold War. That would include all of the indoctrinations against the U.S. that North Korea makes, all of the hostile statements and so forth. There's far more hostility on the North Korean side. So if we're going to have an end of war, let's have it, but let's really end war. And I think if we do, I think there's a prospect that could move forward in the U.S. But it's not clear that North Korea can do that it can treat the world without a scapegoat like the United States. So it's a difficult proposition.
Right. Professor, and going back to talks about a vaccine collaboration then between Seoul and Washington, what are your prospects on actual partnership being signed during Friday's summit?
Well, even though I want to remain very hopeful, optimistic about the future possibility of vaccine partnership between the two countries, but still I'm a little hesitant to say that they're going to be clearly or specifically mentioned in the joint statement. Some of our Korean fellows might expect like a specific number, right? Specific number of doses will be provided from Washington. So that kind of thing, I'm sorry, but I cannot imagine that kind of more specific things, but rather I would say more like, again, the general comprehensive partnership, I think can be included in the joint statement for the future.
And Dr. Burnett, what are your prospects on an actual partnership with regard to vaccines between Seoul and Washington?
Well, President Biden has already announced that he's going to provide 80 million doses of vaccine to other countries. And that's now what he's prepared to do in the short term. The Americans are not consuming the vaccine that we're producing. And so he's going to have more available over time. Now, that's 80 million for a large number of countries around the world. So what can he contribute to South Korea as opposed to many other countries in need? That's a really interesting question and probably won't be announced, I would guess. Maybe it's 1 million doses, but even so, that's only enough because of 2 doses per person for about 500,000 people, or 1% of the South Korean population. So we can't expect that this is going to be a solution of the vaccine shortage in South Korea. As Professor Lim said, this is a case where South Korea has to be able to start producing the vaccine itself. If that can be set up, that's really the key, because South Korea can produce more than enough vaccine for its own consumption and then contribute to the rest of the world. And I think that will be the key thing for us to watch in the summit.
Right, and moving beyond vaccines, Dr. Go, do you expect to witness perhaps notable progress on talks related then to actual peace and stability in the region between Presidents Moon and Biden on Friday.
So we have to remember that when it comes to North Korea, the ball is always in the North Korean court. Even though we talk about the differences and the gap in positions between Seoul and Washington, the two countries are pretty much always in agreement about North Korea. Both countries have already many times reaffirmed their commitment to solving the North Korean issue peacefully and in a respectful manner, and they're always listening to the North Korean regime. It's always North Korea that actually uses the self-created ambiguity and uncertainty regarding its future actions to increase its leverage over other neighbors such as South Korea, Japan, and the United States. So same applies here. So I think even though we have a high expectation for the outcome of the U.S. ROK summit tomorrow, and we would like, especially from President Biden, to reaffirm the U.S. commitment to the principles that was reached back in Singapore summit. It's really up to the North Koreans to respond to the overtures from both Washington and Seoul, and then essentially commit to start the renegotiations again in good faith, and then essentially deliver the promises made before that it was each committed to denuclearization. So we like to very much see the North Korean reaction, not in the form of provocations or some fear, but a very positive statement and reaction to the joint statement that we'll see tomorrow.
Right, perhaps something more productive
Exactly.
in the future. All right, Dr. Go, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Always my
Professor Im,
pleasure.
thank you very much for your time today. And Dr. Gov'T over in the US, thank you very much for your insights. Right then, Korea's current framework of COVID-19 prevention measures, including the ban on gatherings of 5 or more people with social purposes, has been extended for 3 more weeks. Have a good weekend. Thank you for watching.